part of a conversation Doug and I had yesterday, and I sort of wove into a video as an introduction to these conversations that we're having. I said, it's really important that we understand what mentoring is because of the importance of mentoring now unfolding in for the world, and to be able to do it correctly. To do mentoring correctly. Anyone want to pick up on that phrasing, doing mentoring correctly?
I'm waiting to see if Yvonne's going to take the...
Well, I think in the context of having a mentorship certificate of competence, in order for it to demonstrate its value, I think having common terminology is useful, and having common standards to be able to have an adjudicator look and say, yes, this person has the credentials required or not. I think that there is going to always be a little bit of a requirement for it to be rigorous, and yet still stay fluid in the conversation, so that the mentor has the capacity to lead the conversation, to guide the mentee, depending on where the conversation is getting stuck, where it's flowing easily, where there's hesitation. And those are nuances that a seasoned mentor can pick up on. And someone who's going for their certification may not necessarily have that level of understanding initially, but they will once they start looking at the certificate of competence assessment.
Yes. I've been purposeful in the use of the word correctly versus doing it right.
Mm-hmm.
And because I'm going, okay, if I'm doing it right, what does it mean if I do it left? Mm-hmm. And I'm playing. I get that. You know, I play with words. the notion is that if we are constantly talking about right, there starts to become an element of the shoulda, woulda, coulda kind of conversation comes in. I use the word correctly, and to Yvonne, your point of the notion of the wise practices, inspired standards, the terms that I use to explain action outcomes, to have something to lean against as you improve, focus, and strengthen your practice of mentoring, is to understand what it means to have the competence of mentor, which is what the IMC, the International Mentoring Community, is bringing forward for the world. And therefore, the words we choose that we've been sharing have to be correct to the situation in which they're going to be used. That's my 2 toonies worth out of Canada. Doug?
Yeah, so I'm kind of struggling with the concept of correct, and I'm not sure why, but I'm
wonderful.
And maybe it's because of the approach that I take to the conversations and my choice of words that I use when I'm having a conversation with a protege or a mentee, whatever term you're comfortable with. Because if it was correct each and every time that I did something with a particular individual, excuse me, there would be no room for me to learn and grow and change how I deliver. So change my practice, the practice of mentoring. So changing the concepts and the processes. If I say, well, I'm going to do them correctly, I feel as though I'm not allowing myself to explored different options, for lack of a better choice of words, different options on how I could deal with a particular situation.
No, it's great, and that's the exploration that we're looking for in these conversations. A word I might use, Doug uses, Yvonne uses, and those of you who are listening in, is what's going to be in place, right, for that time to be able to have this collaborative conversation, this to establish this collaborative alliance, to find the trust between you so that you can do this learning personally and professionally. And I think that that's really where we're going with. And I think it's wonderful to have these conversations. And I will continue to encourage us, right, in IMC to do that. And I'll do whatever I can to have that happen. And I know Doug's nodding his head, so I'm sure that we're going to find ways to keep doing this.
Well, I also have a perspective on the word wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that the word wrong is helpful to focus on. I think that there are learnings and lessons in life, and we don't get to experience alternate ways of getting creative if something is labeled as wrong, because that seems very final. So I look at, failure, which some people may say something is a failure, but I look at it as a lesson. It's a learning opportunity to do something differently next time.
For
so
sure.
in the context of the competence assessment, I think that's where the skillful adjudicator is able to look and say, this piece may have a variance from the ideal, and yet it still has led to an effective conversation. Because I think you can have correct conversations that may not necessarily take the mentee down a path where they're actually willing to explore something. They know that they got it right, but does that lead them into action and trying it themselves? Maybe, maybe not. And if the essence of mentoring is for learning, then I think we need to give that learning room to breathe. And being right and wrong isn't necessarily where I would see that flourishing.
With the times that I've worked with mentees, proteges, one of the things that I came to understand very quickly is the interaction with the words of the person I am interacting with. There's many times in my life where people have said, you're too academic, you're too this, you're too that, you're this and you're that. And I kept scratching my head trying to figure out what is the message for me. And then I started to pick, no, it's what's happening is that I may be overriding or taking rabbit hole trips or whatever because of my language and my interaction. But if I come to know the person, right, and meet them where they are, and I start to listen to the words that they're using and be open enough to ask the person, I'm not sure I understand how you're using that word. Can we explore that a little bit? Once I caught on to that because of my lived experience and where I came from, it made the world of difference in terms of the conversation that was happening. And so I would just wanted to share that little insight with you as well.
Can I just want to reference an example from my book? Aluminum foil, right? Aluminum foil is great for keeping hot food. However, you can't see what's inside. So if you're covering leftovers with see-through cling wrap, it's easy and it's time-saving. And it became a popular choice, certainly in my house growing up, because if we look at this, journey down scientific memory lane, I see being wrong akin to aluminum foil. Those who think you're wrong have created a solid idea of how things should be, which may or may not fit with your values and actions. So what instead, if we saw life through a lens of cling wrap, seeing through the veil of transparency and looking at what's possible instead of the static wall of aluminum foil, the closed mind of a solid cover?
Great.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So I see lessons as opportunities. They're not necessarily right or wrong. If you choose to look at life through the lens of clarity, the clear plastic wrap that keeps things fresh and lasting longer, you can clearly see how mistakes in life are actually lessons. Quote.
True. And the conversation that we're having in the first hour of our time together was to alert those who are coming to mentoring for the first time, or they're in the journey, they're still early on, and what we're doing is sharing. And the deepness and richness, which is a couple of words that Doug and I use quite often in the international mentoring community, the deeper and the richer that we can get, the better it's going to be for all those who are involved. I think the analogy I would make is something else that I learned, and it came through mentoring as well. And it was a time that I was the mentee, and the mentor were sharing something with me, and I was learning about this tools and techniques to be able to facilitate group interaction to help them do cultural shift and mergers and acquisitions and all that. And he said to me, there's a difference between finding and discovering or looking for, exploring the straight line or the straightest line. And I shook my head a little bit and I said, well, aren't we all about vectors trying to get from A to B? That's the language we use. And he says, slow down a little bit. We're talking about working with people and persons. And sometimes it's about finding the straightest line to get there, which can have some curves, backswings, but it's this notion of the straightest line. And ever since then, when I mentor, is I am doing it from a place of the straightest line with the words of those that I'm interacting with. And again, I just thought I'd share that little anecdote as well.
Yeah, and I think that speaks also to Doug's point about not necessarily feeling that he wants to go through a checklist to know that the conversation is on track. However, at the end, to be able to reflect and say, yes, we covered these things, but they were woven into the conversation as opposed to standalone points that got a yes or a no answer, is what's going to help the conversation feel comfortable, warm, engaging, and real.
Yes, for sure. And I think that what we're doing is we're starting to almost, in a sense, sort of generate a storyline of, the importance of words and the terms and concepts you're using, and letting that open up the pathway that allows us to move forward, right, together, and to be able to enjoy that conversation as we move forward together, which also requires both the mentor and mentee protege to be alert to this reflection, to reflect in and on. And I think that's a really great insight for us this morning. So I think it might be great to maybe shift to something else and explore something else that might be unfolding. I'm just wondering, Yvonne, for you, are you able to stick around, or do you have to pop off, or what's happening for you?
Magically, my 10 o'clock appointment moved to 2 o'clock, so it freed up time on my 11:30 to another day. So I'm good right now.
Okay. Is there any topic that you would like to explore at this point in time?
I didn't look at the agenda for this first session, so I'm following your lead on what you
Okay.
feel would be most valuable to contribute.
Well, then I'll jump in here, Doug, unless you have something.
You go right ahead.
And it comes because of the conversation you had yesterday, and you shared it with me, the notion of free mentoring, paid mentoring, da 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 da. What's the story there? Where can we go with this notion of free and paid mentoring?
I think if you take a look at the research that's out there, there is this notion that mentoring, because it goes way, way back to ancient times, was always done free of charge, and it's viewed as it's that gray-haired old sage, me included, on top of the mountain, passing on their wisdom and knowledge, and it's done out of, I don't know what word to use, so we'll come back to that word, but it's done as a way of helping somebody to learn and grow. Fast forward to today, and a lot of the research that I did on that specific topic is that there is still a split. There are people that still continually mentor at no cost, but there are people now that are actually earning a very good living mentoring and charging for that service, charging people for that service, whether it be by the hour, by the session, however. So I think the general population as a whole is still undecided which way it is, but from my perspective, what I'm seeing is a shift to people now starting to, number one, accept the value that mentoring can bring, but also accept the fact that you may have to pay for that type of service.
Mm. If I can add to what you're saying, Doug, I think I've certainly seen as well a number of different offerings popping up where it is more of a advisor capacity, and typically you have to have 20 plus years of business experience in order to be able to qualify to be on an advisory team. And yet, if you are paired up and you receive a mentor through your company, I don't think it would be a big stretch for the mentee to be thinking about who's hosting this learning opportunity for me. And much like any training and learning opportunity, if I go on a course, I'm going to be, the company is going to be paying for that for me. So that typically comes out of their learning and development fund. So the company is typically hosting this on some sort of technology platform that will be able to facilitate and ease the flow of information, and also provide some metrics to HR on who's actually using the system, how many conversations are happening, are the pairings working, is the mentee engaged, and so that has a cost to it. So I think there's a bit of a shift when it's a hosted program, such as one within a corporation, versus an individual going off and finding their own mentor because they saw someone speak at a conference, loved their energy and their insights, and approached them about being a mentor. That may be more likely where it's not necessarily a paid offering, where it's a one-on-one situation.
Yes. The word that I was introduced to about 3 or 4 years ago, I was working with a software service mentoring program. And the person shared one day, came into the office, well, I think what we've got to do is really tap into this mentoring marketplace. And I went, marketplace, mentoring marketplace. Hang on a minute. That might be an interesting way to share about the notion of free and paid mentoring. And I came to look at it as sort of like a hybrid, is that there's times I'm going to do some frees, there's sometimes I'm going to do some paid. I won't know that until I engage. because I have to have that conversation with the person. So if we want to put it in business terms, yes, it's a marketplace and we're working with our audience. And you can look at it that way and answer the question. But if I go to that sort of reason why I do mentoring, as much as I would love all to be free in a sense, right, to be able to support someone, sometimes when it's free, it's not always seen as of having great value.
Yes.
Correct.
And therefore, you could spend a fair bit of time with someone, it's free, but at the end of it, you ask them, okay, so where are you going? What's happening? How did it go for you? Well, I don't know. It, didn't really do anything for me. And you're sitting there scratching your head going, didn't I just give you some of the best insights, the straightest line possible and you were agreeing with me and we were working with me, and then all of a sudden I feel like I'm falling flat.
Yeah.
And so that was another observation of mine. So Vaughn?
Well, it's one of the reasons, although I hadn't consciously thought about it, now that you've brought this topic up, of course, it's putting the spotlight on it. I think that's one of the reasons why I'm currently mentoring several individuals, but it's inside specific programs. So within BPW, I was 3 years ago, I was chairing their program for a couple of years, and now handing that over to another coach, which is a great background to lead that program. I opted to stay on as a mentor. So that is a program where there are regular touch points to assess how things are going. Is the mentee achieving their goals? Are they achieving some milestones along the way? But it is a formal framework. Same with the other two people that I have, which is through the HR Institute of Alberta right now. So they don't have as much rigor around the achievement of the goal. However, it is a program which the person can earn CPHR points towards their recertification. So there is a distinct reason to add a level of accountability. And I don't offer my services for mentoring outside of that unless they are a for fee to build a program, or where the person really wants mentoring and not coaching.
Okay. Now, Doug, you do quite a variety of mentoring. I think the whole gambit of, all right, the marketplace, the whole gambit of places that you do it. Do you want to add anything and maybe give an example of where you're doing free and where you're doing paid?
Yes. So I have, and I've actually had clients where we've done a combination of both.
Yeah.
So we started out with a fee for service, and when we reached a certain time point that it became me charging for my service was becoming somewhat onerous financially on them, and they were dealing with mental health challenges that in my own heart, I could not leave them on the island by themselves, which is one of my comments that I always talk about. So, and then it was back and forth is, when and if you happen to have some extra cash and you feel comfortable throwing a little of that my way, that's great. But in the interim, let's just continue on with the, the mentoring relationship that we have, because it's, I don't want to leave you on the island by yourself. So combinations there. What I do find is that, and I've started to kind of tighten things up a little bit for myself, in that it was very, very easy to get caught up in the, oh, you need a mentor, oh, pick me and I'll work with you, only to realize that over time, working with, 5 or 6 people turned out to be 25 and 30 people, and you're trying to fit everybody in and make sure that people are committed to that process. What I've found now is when I get, say, an inquiry through Quora saying, would you mentor me? And I go back and say, sure, here's my rate. And they disappear. They're gone. So it wasn't all that horribly important to them to invest something in themselves, because we could have a conversation and it may not be what my normal rate is. It may be a bit less than that. And who knows, I may throw in a free session here and there. But what I find is that if they don't commit to subscribing and paying for the service, they're not subscribing to the mentoring process. They won't commit. And I think we've mentioned that already.
Yeah, and I think it's also the same mindset that carries forward into events. If you host a free event, chances are that 50% of the audience won't show up. Whereas if they've paid just a little bit over what is considered to be a fair price, because you're delivering extra value with components after the event as well, then the chances are they'll at least send a substitute because they've paid for the seeds. Psychology 101, right?
Yes. Well, and I think this is an important conversation because this point about free and paid is one of the action outcomes in module 1 about the mentor. It's sort of like establishing the baseline to work from. Maybe next week we can talk about something like when do you say no and when do you say yes to someone asking you at the very beginning. And because we're rolling up to time of our close up of our first hour, and so that we can take a break and then to come back at 11:15, because the 11:15 conversation, as I think would be great. Again, Yvonne, if you can stick around for a little bit at that point, even if it's 20 minutes or so, and maybe explore like a 1 or 2 tools or techniques that we're using, because the conversation too is for those who are in the mentoring already and are looking for ways to improve focus and strengthen their approach. So would it be fair? Would you be able to stick around for that, Yvonne? Come back in around 11:15?
Yes, and then I have another call that starts at noon. I have about 10 minutes of prep for, so I can stay.
That'd be great. Yeah. So we'll just explore maybe a tool or technique when we come back in 11:15. But Yvonne, anything you want to close up, conversation, any key learning that you picked up from today? And Doug, I'll ask you the same thing, and then I'll share something, and we'll go into pause mode on the recording and go take a break.
Yeah, I think this last piece, talking about, paid or unpaid, I think it's a really important piece, especially in light of what's happening in the world today, where we're all being given an opportunity to press the pause button. Unless you have young kids that are at home and you happen to be a nurse, in which case there is no pause button right now. Mm-hmm. But for many of us, it's an opportunity to reflect and really evaluate, where have I been spending my time? Because so many people are wearing this badge of busyness, I'm busy, and that's supposed to be a badge of honor. Whereas if we think about the wisdom that, even in our 3 gray-haired, well, mine's not gray, but in our heads, that we're coming to the table with, just in this conversation, there is massive, massive value that has been acquired. So, why would you give it away for free? And yet I also have a social enterprise element in my business where, I have that servant heart where for every copy of my book that's purchased, I donate one to a women's shelter foundation or not-for-profit. So I think it's causing us all to pause and say, where have we been spending our time? Where have the relationships been deeply rewarding for both parties? And where are some things that I'm really not feeling that I'm getting value back from? And that is another factor that plays into whether or not I have capacity to add on another protege or mentee. How busy is my calendar already? If I've just, volunteered to be on a board, then that time slot is now used for something else. And the same conversation happens with, are you a paid board member, or are you on a not-for-profit board and serving for free?
Yeah.
So it's a balance. And I think as long as we all live with good conscience that we're doing the right thing, then the world works.
Yes. Well, thank you for that. Doug, thoughts? Close up?
Yeah, the sort of my parting thought is as a topic for either the next hour or the next week at the beginning is paid versus free, certified versus not certified.
Okay. Great point. Great point. I think for me is just listening to the stories, because we can share aspects of what we're talking about from a conceptual point of view. And I appreciate the stories that are being shared. And this notion of storytelling, story sharing, I think is another topic to explore another time. So with that, I'm going to hit the pause button and we'll take a break. I'll be back on a few minutes prior to 11:15, and we'll take it from there. So we'll see you shortly. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.